Hello, friends, and welcome back. It is so good to have you here with us today. We need to talk about something that is fundamentally reshaping our world, something the headlines are calling the Donroe Doctrine. If you have been paying attention to the news lately, you know that the United States is currently set on a great power collision course that could change everything about how we live. This is not just political noise. This is about our national security and the future of our hemisphere. What we are witnessing is a historic shift, perhaps the most significant since the Cold War. And it is happening right in our own backyard. The capture of Venezuela's leader was just the beginning, and to understand where we are going, we have to understand the immense stakes of this new doctrine. Before we dive deeper, I want to hear from you. Have you been seeing these headlines about the Donroe Doctrine in your local news? Or does this feel like it's flying under the radar? Let me know in the comments below. Do not believe the hype you hear about Venezuela. Forget about Maduro and his new sports suit. At 2 o'clock in the morning on January 3rd, 2026, American helicopters touched down at a military compound in Caracas. Within 30 minutes, President Nicolas Maduro, a man who had survived countless sanctions, protests, and diplomatic isolation, was in handcuffs being flown to an American aircraft carrier. But here is what most analysts missed. This was not about Maduro. This was not even about drugs, despite the official narco-terrorism charges. This was about China. I have spent years analyzing geopolitical conflicts. And I can tell you that what we witnessed in Venezuela is not an isolated incident. It is the opening shot of something much larger. Welcome to the Donroe Doctrine. And if you think this is just the president being tough for his base, I'm going to show you why this might be the most consequential American foreign policy shift in decades. While America was busy bleeding treasure and credibility in Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine, something profound happened right here in our neighborhood. China did not invade Latin America. It did something far more effective. It bought it. The numbers tell the story. In the year 2000, China's trade with Latin America was negligible, about $12 billion. By 2024, it hit $518 billion. That is a 40-fold increase in 24 years. Today, China is the top trading partner for Brazil, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and Argentina. Let me put that another way. For every major South American economy that actually matters, China has already displaced the United States. But trade statistics are abstract concepts. Let me show you what this looks like on the ground. In November 2024, China opened the port of Chongqing in Peru. This is not some small-time facility. We are talking about a $3.5 billion deep-water megaport majority owned by COSCO, a Chinese state company, with fully autonomous cranes capable of handling ships too large for the Panama Canal. The significance of this is massive. Chongqing creates a direct maritime corridor from Shanghai to South America that completely bypasses North American ports. A voyage that used to take 35 days now takes 23. Costs dropped by 20%. China's ambassador called it the Shanghai of South America. Peru's transport minister wants it to become the Singapore of Latin America. And here's the kicker. China and Brazil are now exploring a railway that would connect Chongqing to the Atlantic coast, creating an alternative to the Panama Canal itself, a Chinese-controlled transcontinental corridor across South America. Think about that for a second. A Chinese-controlled trade route that bypasses our ports entirely. Does that make you concerned for American trade dominance? Or do you think competition is good for the region? I'm curious to see where you stand on this. Now, this moves us into a resource war and forces us to confront a new definition of control. But ports are just the visible infrastructure. Let me tell you about the invisible kind. China State Grid Corporation has invested $12.5 billion in Brazil's power sector. They have built ultra-high voltage transmission lines stretching 2,000 kilometers. They now control critical portions of the electrical grid, supplying Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. If you live in Brazil's largest cities, there's a reasonable chance your lights stay on because of Chinese infrastructure. In 2025, State Grid won a $3.6 billion contract to build another 1,500-kilometer power line connecting Brazil's renewable energy-rich northeast to consumption centers in the south. They are planning to invest $40 billion more by the year 2030. And then there is lithium. The so-called Lithium Triangle, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, holds 60% of the world's lithium reserves. This is the battery metal, the one that makes electric vehicles possible, the one our entire domestic auto industry depends on. Bolivia alone has double the lithium resources of Chile. And until very recently, Bolivia's state lithium company had billion-dollar deals with China's KATL, the world's largest battery manufacturer, and with Russia's Uranium One. Here's the cold truth. Without South American lithium, there is no American green transition. There is no domestic electric vehicle industry. Our major car manufacturers all need these resources, and China has been locking them up. Now, countries can pretend this is just business, just comparative advantage, just free markets doing their thing. But that is not how Washington sees it. To the American national security establishment, what China has done is build a resource extraction empire in America's strategic backyard, while America was not paying attention. The Monroe Doctrine, that 200-year-old policy stating that the Western Hemisphere belongs to American influence, has been gutted, not by tanks or missiles, but by shipping containers and power lines. And the president has decided that is over. The Monroe Doctrine is a big deal. The president said after Maduro's capture that we have superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Donroe Doctrine. This was not just bragging. This was the president articulating in his own unique way a fundamental reorientation of American foreign policy. Let me break down what the Donroe Doctrine actually means in practice. First, the Western Hemisphere is now officially priority number one. The December 2025 National Security Strategy, which is 31 pages long, devotes 5 pages specifically to Latin America. That is more than Europe and more than Asia. The document explicitly identifies non-hemispheric competitors as existential threats to American security. That means China, that means Russia, that means Iran. The strategy states that America will use leverage in finance and technology to induce countries to reject what it calls low-cost foreign assistance, meaning Chinese investment. Translation: choose us or face the consequences. And the president has decided that is over. The Monroe Doctrine is a big deal. The president said after Maduro's capture that we have superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Donroe Doctrine. This was not just bragging. This was the president articulating in his own unique way a fundamental reorientation of American foreign policy. Let me break down what the Donroe Doctrine actually means in practice. First, the Western Hemisphere is now officially priority number one. The December 2025 National Security Strategy, which is 31 pages long, devotes 5 pages specifically to Latin America. That is more than Europe and more than Asia. The document explicitly identifies non-hemispheric competitors as existential threats to American security. That means China, that means Russia, that means Iran. The strategy states that America will use leverage in finance and technology to induce countries to reject what it calls low-cost foreign assistance, meaning Chinese investment. Translation: choose us or face the consequences. Second, the doctrine is not diplomacy, it is economic coercion. In April 2025, the administration announced Liberation Day, a baseline 10% tariff on virtually all imports. But the real weapon is secondary sanctions. Countries that maintain Chinese economic relationships face escalating penalties. The message to Latin American governments is simple. You can trade with China or you can trade with us. Pick one. Mexico has already gotten the message. Under intense pressure, the Mexican government is advancing legislation to impose tariffs up to 50% on Chinese goods, specifically to prevent Beijing from using Mexico as a backdoor into the American market. Third, military force is explicitly on the table. Venezuela proved this is not just talk, but Venezuela was the easy target, a pariah state with no powerful friends willing to fight for it. As the pressure mounts, we are seeing the drawing of lines and the emergence of critical flashpoints. The doctrine goes further than just Venezuela. The administration has expanded the Monroe Doctrine as geographic scope from the Aleutian Islands to Greenland and the North American Arctic, all the way to Antarctica. They have announced expanded military deployments across the Caribbean, Central America, and the Pacific approaches. The Secretary of State traveled to Panama within weeks of taking office, delivering an ultimatum: reduce Chinese influence over the canal or face American measures. Panama got the message. Hutchison Holdings, the Hong Kong company operating ports at both ends of the canal, is now selling those assets to an American consortium. Panama has withdrawn from China's Belt and Road Initiative. Fourth, we see the carrot and stick approach. Bolivia's new president, elected in late 2025, is already terminating lithium contracts with China and Russia. His foreign minister announced they are seeking a long-term relationship with the United States. In exchange, Washington is offering credit lines, financing, and technology transfers. Argentina's leader has become the president's closest regional ally. When Washington threatened Panama, Argentina declared its unequivocal support for delivering the canal to American interests. He was the only regional leader to refuse signing a statement defending Panamanian sovereignty. The hemisphere is being sorted, allies and adversaries, dollar or yuan. So where does this lead? Let me walk you through the pressure points that could explode. Mexico is the front line. Mexico is not just America's largest trading partner. It is the linchpin of Chinese supply chain circumvention. Chinese companies have been building phantom factories in Mexico, importing components and re-exporting them to the United States under tariff exemptions. The trade agreement itself is up for renegotiation in 2026. The White House is demanding not just trade concessions, but security cooperation that amounts to American operational control over Mexican territory. The justification involves cartels, fentanyl, and migration. But look closer. The real issue is that Mexico is the last major barrier preventing American companies from completely decoupling from Chinese manufacturing. The administration needs Mexico aligned, and if Mexico does not comply fully, remember the threat to designate cartels as terrorist organizations. That would not just be symbolic. That would give the U.S. military legal authority to conduct operations inside Mexico with or without Mexican consent. Designating cartels as terrorist organizations would change everything about how we engage with Mexico. Do you think that's a necessary step for security, or is it an overreach? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Brazil presents a different challenge. This is not a weak state that can be bullied. Brazil is the world's 9th largest economy. It has the Amazon, it has oil, it has agricultural exports that both America and China need. And its leadership has made clear they will not choose sides. Brazil is a founding member of the BRICS alliance. At the May 2025 China summit, Brazil's leader stood beside the Chinese president, announcing $3 billion in new Chinese renewable energy investments. State Grid is building more power lines. Chinese companies are opening electric vehicle factories. But Brazil also hosts American investment. Its commodities flow to U.S. markets. Its military has traditional ties to Washington. The administration initially slapped 40% tariffs on Brazilian agricultural exports. They have since been partially rolled back, but the threat demonstrated the leverage America holds. The question is whether Brazil can maintain its strategic autonomy when both superpowers are demanding alignment. Here is a flashpoint almost no one is discussing. Argentina hosts the only deepwater port capable of servicing Antarctic operations, located in Ushuaia. China has been expanding its Antarctic presence with multiple research stations and increasing naval activity in waters the United States considers strategically vital. Under its current leadership, Argentina has pivoted hard toward Washington. But what happens if a future Argentine government decides Chinese investment in Patagonian ports is more attractive than American demands? The December 2025 National Security Strategy explicitly extends the Donroe Doctrine to Antarctica. That is not an accident. This dynamic creates what I call the escalation trap, and it comes with historic stakes. And then there is Nicaragua. This might be the wildest card in the deck. In November 2024, the Nicaraguan leadership revived a long-dormant plan for an interoceanic canal, 445 kilometers, connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific, dwarfing Panama's 80-kilometer route. The pitch made directly to Chinese investors is a canal wide enough and deep enough to handle the megaships Panama cannot accommodate, a route completely outside American influence, a permanent alternative to U.S. dominance of hemispheric maritime logistics. The price tag is between $50 billion and $80 billion. Only a state actor could finance it. If China's access to the Panama Canal becomes untenable under American pressure, Beijing has a backup plan sitting on the table. Now, here's the question everyone should be asking. Why won't China just leave? And the answer is brutally simple. It cannot. China's economy is structured around manufacturing exports and resource imports. It needs Brazilian iron ore. It needs Chilean copper. It needs Bolivian lithium. It needs Venezuelan oil. These are not luxuries. These are existential inputs. If America successfully forces Latin America to choose, and Latin America mostly chooses America, China faces resource strangulation. Not immediately, not catastrophically, but slowly, steadily, the raw materials that feed Chinese industry become more expensive, harder to access, and subject to American approval. That is unacceptable to Beijing, which means China will fight back. We are already seeing the playbook. Hours after the Venezuela strike, China conducted military exercises simulating blockades of Taiwan's largest ports. The message was unmistakable. If you can conduct military operations to secure your strategic interests, so can we. Analysts in Beijing are explicitly noting that America's willingness to use force in Latin America provides rhetorical ammunition for similar Chinese actions in the Taiwan Strait. This is the escalation trap. America acts in its hemisphere. China acts in its neighborhood. Each action justifies the other. Each response raises the stakes. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war over Soviet missiles 90 miles from Florida. What I am describing is not nuclear, but in some ways it is more dangerous because this is not a single crisis that can be resolved through negotiation. This is structural competition over the economic arteries of the global system. There is no missile to remove, no single concession that fixes it. Either China maintains its resource access to Latin America, or America reasserts hemispheric dominance. Both cannot happen simultaneously. That is why I believe we are heading toward a long confrontation. Not necessarily a hot war, though Venezuela shows that is possible, but sustained economic warfare, competing infrastructure, proxy political battles, coups and counter-coups. A second Cold War, but this time in America's backyard. This brings us to a crucial question about what this means for our wallets and the very stability of our financial future. When we talk about great power competition, it often sounds like a game of chess played by people in dark rooms. But for those of us who have worked hard, saved for retirement, and watched the cost of living climb, this is about much more than maps. It is about the price of the goods in our stores and the security of our retirement accounts. You see, the Donroe Doctrine is essentially an attempt to forcibly reshore our entire supply chain. For 40 years, the American economy was built on the ideas of globalization, the belief that we could get things cheaper if they were made somewhere else. That era is dead. How are you feeling the effects of inflation lately? Are you seeing it at the grocery store or the gas station? I want to know if you think bringing manufacturing back home is worth the short-term price hikes. If the administration successfully forces Mexico to decouple from China, we are looking at a massive reorganization of how products are made. This nearshoring might bring jobs back to North America, but it comes with a heavy price tag. In the short term, this transition is inflationary. We are talking about replacing low-cost Chinese manufacturing with more expensive labor and new factories that have to be built from scratch. If you are on a fixed income, like many in our community, you know that every cent matters. The 10% baseline tariffs on imports are not just numbers on a balance sheet, they are taxes on the consumer. Furthermore, we have to consider the risk to the US dollar. For 80 years, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency. This has allowed the United States to run large deficits and maintain a standard of living that would otherwise be impossible. But as we force countries to choose between the dollar and the yuan, we are accelerating the creation of an alternative financial system. China and Russia are already working on a payment system that bypasses Western banks. If the BRICS nations, led by Brazil and China, successfully move away from the dollar for their massive trade in oil, iron, and lithium, the demand for our currency could drop. What does that mean for you? It means the value of the dollars in your savings account could be eroded. It means the purchasing power of your Social Security check could shrink. We are entering a period where the geopolitical goals of Washington might directly conflict with the financial stability of Main Street. We are asking our neighbors to the south to give up their most lucrative customer, China, and rely entirely on us. But if we cannot offer them the same level of investment, we are essentially asking them to become poor for the sake of our national security. That is a volatile recipe for regional instability. We also need to be honest about the potential for mission creep. History shows us that when we designate foreign groups as terrorists or use the military to solve economic problems, those operations rarely stay small. We could find ourselves entangled in a series of gray zone conflicts, not quite wars, but certainly not peace. This would require even more government spending, adding to a national debt that is already over $34 trillion. As we focus all our energy on reclaiming our backyard, we have to ask ourselves, are we prepared for the economic sacrifices this will demand from every American household? There is one more actor in this drama that we have not properly discussed, Latin America itself. For 20 years, Latin American countries benefited from great power competition. They could play Washington against Beijing, extracting concessions from both. Chinese investment filled gaps that American neglect created. That era is ending. The Donroe Doctrine is forcing a choice, and the consequences of choosing wrong from Washington's perspective have become viscerally clear. Venezuela's leader chose wrong. He is now in a Manhattan jail cell facing drug trafficking charges. While American officials discuss who will run his country, other leaders are watching. Bolivia's path pivoted immediately after taking office. Panama folded under pressure. Argentina never needed convincing, but not everyone will comply. Brazil will not abandon its China relationship without a fight. Mexico's nationalism runs deep. Cuba and Nicaragua are ideologically committed to resisting American hegemony. This brings us to the final verdict and leaves us with a haunting thought. What happens when immovable objects meet irresistible forces? If history teaches anything, it is this. When great powers collide, small nations suffer. The battlegrounds of the Cold War, Korea, Vietnam, Central America, were not superpowers. They were the places superpowers fought through. Latin America is about to learn what it means to be the battlefield. The Donroe Doctrine is not just a policy. It is a declaration that neutrality is no longer an option. It declares that the era of multi-alignment is over, that America is, in the president's own words, back home, and it is angry. The question now is whether Latin America can chart its own course, or whether the choice has already been made for it. Whether the coming decade will see genuine partnership and development, or whether it will see the return of something darker, something older, the shadow of empire falling once again over a continent that thought it had finally escaped. The signs are not encouraging. The tanks are not rolling everywhere yet, but the pressure is mounting. The ultimatums are being delivered. The choices are being demanded. And in boardrooms and presidential palaces from Mexico City to Buenos Aires, leaders are calculating not what is right, not what is just, but what is survivable. That is the world this new doctrine has created, a world where geography is destiny once again. Where being close to America means being subject to America, where the price of sovereignty might be economic ruin or worse. China built its Latin American strategy on a premise that economic engagement would be protected by the international legal order, that sovereignty meant something, that trade could flow regardless of politics. Venezuela proved that premise was contingent on Washington's restraint, and that restraint has ended. What comes next is uncertain, but one thing is clear. The rules have changed. The game has changed. In Latin America, caught between two giants, will bear the consequences. Whether those consequences look like prosperity or devastation, partnership or domination, independence or subjugation, that story is still being written. But the pen is no longer in Latin American hands. Let me leave you with one final thought, one that keeps me up at night as an analyst. This doctrine assumes that America can win this competition, that Latin American countries will ultimately choose Washington over Beijing. It assumes that economic pressure and military threats will be enough to roll back 2 decades of Chinese integration. But what if that assumption is wrong? China is not standing still. In May 2025, the Chinese leadership hosted a forum in Beijing where leaders from across Latin America attended. They announced a new $9 billion credit line for the region. New free trade agreements were signed with Ecuador and Nicaragua. Colombia joined the Belt and Road Initiative. The numbers keep moving in China's direction. Chinese exports to Latin America grew 8% in 2025, even as exports to the United States fell 18%. Beijing is adapting, finding new routes, new partners, new ways to maintain its position. And here's the uncomfortable truth. For many Latin American countries, China offers something America does not. Investment without conditions, infrastructure without lectures, partnership without ultimatums. The United States has free trade agreements with 11 Latin American countries. But what has America actually built in the region? In the last 20 years, where are the American ports, the American power lines, the American railways? The answer is nowhere. America offered ideology. China offered concrete. That is the vulnerability at the heart of this new doctrine. It is trying to win a competition through coercion that it already lost through neglect. It is demanding loyalty from countries that Washington ignored for a generation. Some countries will comply because they have no choice. Their proximity to America, their economic dependence, their military weakness, these factors make resistance impossible. But others will resist. They will find ways to maintain their Chinese relationships despite American pressure. They will hedge. They will delay. They will play both sides until they are forced to choose. And when that choice comes, some of them will choose China. Not because they love Beijing, not because they believe in Chinese values, but because China has been there building things, signing checks, treating them like partners rather than subjects. If you were a leader in a Latin American country, would you choose the infrastructure of China or the alliance of the US? This is the central question of our age, and I'd love to see your arguments in the comments. This new doctrine might succeed in rolling back some Chinese influence. It might secure the Panama Canal and the Lithium Triangle and the strategic choke points that matter most to Washington. But it might also accelerate the very thing it is trying to prevent. It might push fence-sitters toward China. It might unite Latin American nationalism against American imperialism. It might create the kind of anti-American coalition that Washington has feared since the Cold War. History is full of powerful nations that overreached, that demanded too much, that turned friends into enemies through arrogance and force. America has been the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere for 2 centuries. That dominance is now being challenged for the first time since the Soviet Union placed missiles in Cuba. How America responds to that challenge will shape the century to come, not just for Latin America, but for the entire global order. The Donroe Doctrine is the current answer: force, coercion, ultimatums. The iron fist inside the velvet glove with the glove now removed. It might work. Empires have been built on less, but it might also fail. And if it fails, if Latin America slips further into Chinese orbit despite everything America throws at it, then this doctrine will not be remembered as a restoration of American power. It will be remembered as the moment America lost its backyard. The stakes could not be higher. The outcome could not be less certain. And the world is watching to see what happens next. One thing I know for sure is that this story is just beginning. The opening shots have been fired. The battle lines are being drawn, and somewhere in Caracas, in a country now under American supervision, the ghost of the Monroe Doctrine has risen from its grave. It has a new name now, and friends, it is hungry. If you found this analysis helpful, please hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to see the bigger picture. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories shaping our world. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the comments.